What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus-hour days 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking shit. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is fucked up and the department manager my name was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know shit about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to bitch my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only less than CEO greater than could fire him. I said, "In my name, right?" He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an asshole. As my previous foreman would say, I can fix dumb but I can't fix stupid. I say that in games. Sorry, I can't heal stupid. That's a condition. I had a boss whose #1 hiring philosophy was we can teach people work skills, but we can't teach them what their parents should have taught them. Been a guiding principle for me when hiring ever since. When I was in high school, I worked at Popular Warehouse Club selling computers on the weekends. I was hired by the store manager via referral of a friend. I loved computers and they thought I'd make a good salesman, so my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers, nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that, and insisted that I needed to go fold clothes for a while. As in, half my damn shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me never to leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend when both the power trip and shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager close behind. Store manager slaps a stack of green bar paper, this was a while ago, down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, "Do you see this? This is our average technology sales numbers for the weeks you are on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sales numbers for weeks you are not. At this point, it would be more cost effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution?" The guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I was not to leave the technology department unless I was on break or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. The best jobs are when management has your back. Knowing this and the value of what you bring to the table is the best thing that manager could have ever done. I hope you kept this as a reference for future jobs. There is that other side of that sword. When you are so good at the job you do, that you oblivious or overqualified for, that a bad manager, that you think is good, keeps you there because they can't afford to lose you at that position. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment/discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed, left half his order on the counter and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night, as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie, without popcorn. Good on you. I hate those abusive fucks, always finding some young, sweet person to abuse. I swear there's people who genuinely get off on harassing teenagers until they cry. I'm a massively nervous and non-confrontational person, but even I had to step in once when a guy in the movie theater line made the poor counter girl cry because she gave him normal Pepsi instead of Pepsi Max. I understand that some people have other shit going on and snap at the wrong people, but damn, the 16-year-old girl scooping popcorn into a bucket for minimum wage doesn't deserve your ire. The guy that I'd gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents. Things went well, or so I thought. He drives me home, We end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company, so we end up hanging out until 3 a.m. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home, so he drives himself home to find that he's been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside, he shouldn't be spending time with someone like me, still don't know what she meant by that, and that I'm just another stop on the pussy train. He tells her not to talk about me like that, to which she says, when you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want. So he picks up his phone, calls me, asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years, we're engaged, have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding/celebration after the end of the plague. Deleted. Don't forget in your thank you speech to include your mill. Without your words of support and wisdom, I wouldn't be married to your son and riding the train of happiness today or something better. Greater than. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding/celebration after the end of the plague. As a rail fan, I'm sure I can train you on some ideas that will drive your mill off the rails, maybe even a little loco. If that doesn't consist of a good idea for you, I'm sure I can switch tracks and point you in the right direction. This is a bit silly, but gave me a great feeling of satisfaction. Due to the bad economy and poor money management, my parents have moved into the spare room of the house my husband and I bought a year ago. Things are mostly smooth, though I'm not the closest to them for several reasons I won't go into here. The other evening I was out gardening, because it's hot during the day and we have the luck of having a street light right next to our front yard, keeping it pretty well illuminated even after sundown. I mostly garden at night, and I thought I had gotten the hose twisted, as it kept getting stuck. This went on for a bit, when I realized that it wasn't stuck, but being pulled. I looked into the dim area just past the illumination of the street light and spied my father, crouched over and tugging the hose. Well, I did the only reasonable thing to do, and I sprayed him. He yelled and ran inside with me chasing. Once he got inside he made a face and goes, "You can't get me now, I'm inside." In that father to daughter don't you make a mess tone of voice. I readied my hose, looked him in the eye and said, "It's my house," and just fucking let loose with the hose. He was soaked, worth cleaning up the mess for that moment of true fear in his eyes. Edit, thanks for all the appreciation. I'm glad my silly story made your day better. I can just imagine his reaction once you said that. It's like one of those action movie one-liners before the kill. This is the most wholesome shit I've ever heard in my life. This was great. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp, "Do not copy" on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" She answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. Does a do not copy stamp even hold any authority? I think I would just photocopy it regardless, lol. I wasn't good at returning library books when I was a kid. I got lectured by my school librarian about it a lot. Fast forward 20 years and I'm a supervisor at the local public library and my former now retired school librarian goes there. One day I see her sneaking around the front desk instead of coming back to say hi to me and I immediately figure something's up. I go up to say hi and she acts exasperated and tells me she was trying to avoid me because she had overdue books. So I put on my reading glasses, pulled them down over my nose, and delivered the same lecture she'd given me countless times about being responsible and turning in books on time. Your training is now complete. That would be a customer we had named Nick. I'll leave his last name out to protect the stupid. He would email us and always CC editor at some national newspaper com. And most of his emails were things like "nothing fucking works." None of the national newspapers responded. I imagine some underling just rolled his eyes and deleted them. Finally, he said, "Fix this in 5 minutes or I cancel." My manager says, "Let me see that email." He responded, "Thank you, I canceled your account. We don't want customers like you anyway. If you want to contact the media, that's your call. I'll happily provide the months of threatening emails you sent to my staff." He gave us months of headaches over a £45/quarter account. We definitely didn't need him. Having worked for a national paper answering reader issues, he is not alone in ceasing in media outlets to every complaint. He is in a depressingly large club. Local newspaper reporter here. We get the exact same thing and it's over the most bizarre things. PSA for people who do this: 99.9% of the time, your email will be circled around the newsroom for a good fucking laugh, then dumped into the bin. I honestly don't know why more companies don't do this. The culture of the customer is always right means that the 2% of your client base that are born assholes get accommodated, costing the company far more than the profit they get. In my opinion, telling the customer to take their business elsewhere is the sensible move as it transfers your costs to your competition. I used to work for a super cunty manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, shit-talking us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is shittier than ever, and how much this store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, "If you don't leave, then the cops are gonna make you." When the douchebag didn't move, new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. You know he's a douchebag because he came back to where he got fired from. IT services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem. 8 hours minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes. They'd set up something incorrectly and it was pretty obvious once I got into the system. I was packing up to leave and the client stopped me. "What are you doing?" "The system is fixed, so I'm headed out back to my office." "No, I paid for 8 hours. You'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours, that's what you'll be doing." "Right, so anyway, I'm leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice and in all likelihood will no longer be working with you and withdrawing your lease on our equipment." A client once paid for me to fly to New York and spend 2 nights in a nice Manhattan hotel to add a semicolon to a config file. I went to Boston from Atlanta to flip a switch to on. And then what happened? This is a good one. I need to hear what happened afterwards. The first time I had dinner at my parents' house after I got my own apartment. My dad was giving me grief as usual. Finally, I stood up and said, "I don't live here anymore. I don't have to put up with you this way any longer. I'm going home." And walked out. Most liberating moment of my life. It's funny, I have an 18-year-old, and just tonight I was saying to him to remember that he has the right to walk away when he's being mistreated, whether it is by us, a boss or whomever. It took me way too long into adulthood to realize it on my own. Kudos to you for figuring it out early. I've also stressed with him growing up that he should always commit part of his money to savings, to what I call the fuck you fund. I see it as giving someone the freedom and resources to say fuck you and leave situations as needed. The fuck you fund is such a great idea. I'm stealing that one for my boys. One's 3.5, the other on the way. I started working for a welding company as an engineering manager. We were selling an extremely complex weldment, pressure tank that goes under the shitter, for $4.9K, out costs were $9.3K. The owner took the bid to get in with this big company. The owner legit said, "We'll make it up in volume." We weren't. Anyway, the buyer for the larger company was a huge bitch and would regularly yell on phone calls. We sent them a letter that we would honor the last 5 tanks on the current PO at the same price. I didn't even want to do that. But after that they were going up to 10K per. She drove down with her boss the next day and demanded an explanation and threatened to pull the business. I replied that we were losing 5K per tank and couldn't do it anymore. She demanded evidence, which I already had pulled up and simply turned on the projector. I said, "As you can see, we cannot continue to make this part at such a huge loss, and I don't think anyone can make it for the original price, so if you have to pull the business, we understand." Her boss tripped over himself cutting her off and said they weren't pulling out and actually thanked us for honoring the current PO. I didn't have many run-ins with her after that. Know your costs and never be afraid to fire a customer. I have many times. Most all come back. Let them save face and very often they become actual good customers. This is so important. In my younger years I took any job for any client. After a few years I was large enough to hire a salesperson. The first thing he did was to show which clients were profitable. It turned out that all of our PA tax clients were not profitable. I was losing money due to additional service calls or additions. They would refuse to pay for the change order. I thought I was providing good customer service. Turns out, I was a sucker. 3 to 4 months after my salesperson was hired, I fired almost all of those clients, and more than doubled company profits and lost my 80-hour weeks. Well, this might be a long one. I grew up around a mother with dissociative disorder as well as narcissism. She was addicted to opiates as far back as I can remember, and would do anything to get them, and I mean anything. Growing up, it wasn't rare for her to have a tantrum during one of her highs and beat the shit out of me, break me down by picking apart every little thing she knew I was afraid or self-conscious of, and actively sabotage my relationship with my father and siblings. She would be up for days at a time, pass out standing up with her eyes glassed over and back hunched, and when she festered once again start moving and otherwise destroying everything in the house. There were times where I'd leave and the house would be clean, and come home and it would look as though a pissed off tornado had run through the house, i.e. broken glass, animal feces, dirty clothes, roaches, empty pill bottles, ground up pill residue, and other miscellaneous things littering the house. On particularly bad nights she would hallucinate, and during those times it wouldn't be uncommon to find pools of her blood on the ground from running through glass. I remember being up for days at a time because her and my father would scream at each other for days at a time without stopping, actively trying to get me to pick one side or the other, even if it meant barging into my room at 4 a.m. to begin their screaming match where I could watch. She manipulated me, abandoned me at times in the middle of nowhere when she'd meet up with her various sugar daddies. She was still with my dad during this, and never once apologized during her brief moments of mental clarity. If anything, she would blame everything but herself. In her mind she was infallible. Money was always a big issue since she couldn't work in such a state. She sold some of her pills, yes, but ultimately those funds were used to buy more drugs anyway. Because of this, we were homeless frequently, without power and water for literally years at a time, and barely ever had any food. It was almost every night I went to sleep with the only thing I'd have eaten that day being a school lunch. On weekends, sometimes I didn't eat at all. The rest of my family had no clue this was happening. During the summer when I was 16, my aunt, whom I hadn't talked much with since I was a lot younger, got in touch. She asked if I'd like to come to stay with them in Texas for a few weeks during the summer. Of course I said yes, and I was absolutely ecstatic. I didn't bother asking my parents since I'd be very much surprised if they even noticed I was gone, so they were unaware. My aunt drove up all the way to Iowa and stayed the afternoon with us. My parents seemed to lack the cognition to recognize she was even there out of the blue, so they didn't come out of their room. As I stated before would happen frequently, when she arrived our house was fairly clean. We left for a bit to go get food, and when we returned the tornado had already passed. As she told me when we were on our way to Texas, the thing that bothered her the most wasn't that our house had suddenly gone to hell, it was that I didn't even react to it. Instead, I tiptoed around the debris and started packing my things without a word. This deeply unsettled her, and ultimately she asked me if I was safe where I lived. I said yes, as it was all I had ever known. She told me that what she saw frightened her, and she wanted me to come live with her in Texas. Thinking that she was joking, I brushed it off. After a few days down there though, I knew I had to do it. They showed me love, compassion, and care that I'd never even known existed prior to this, and it shook me to my core. So we decided, I was going to get emancipated from my parents and move in with them. Ultimately, this involved sitting in a courthouse across from my parents and their lawyer. The judge asked why I wanted to leave, and I explained the above. I expressed the love and compassion I'd experienced for the first time in my life, and that I wanted to, for once, live in peace. Their lawyer rebutted, "To me, it seems as though you have no respect for your parents. Is it because of their financial situation? It looks as though you're attached to the perks of living in a family that makes a reasonable amount of money, and not that you want to leave because they're unfit parents." My mother and father joined in, hooting and hollering, actively trying to break me down as they have so many times before. I let them speak, and I held my tongue until it was my turn. They tried to goad me on, tried to break me as they had so many times before, but I wouldn't let them. Finally, the judge asked me to speak. With as level a stare as I could muster, I looked at mother, my father, and their lawyer across from me and said, "If you're asking me if I have no respect for my parents, then you are correct. However, to say it's simply financially motivated is incorrect. I no longer have respect for them because they have." As I was nearly finished, my mother, as she had so many times in the past, began to squirm and scream at me from across the table. "He's lying, the little bastard is you." Until the judge slammed his gavel down and cut the room, my mother staring up at him in complete and utter disbelief. I looked at her, keeping the tears I knew were right behind the corner at bay, and said, "For once in your life, for once in my life, behave as an adult. You can't stop me by simply yelling over me anymore. You have nothing to hold over me now. You can do nothing." As I spoke, the judge motioned to his officer, who moved towards my mother. Her expression still frozen in complete bewilderment as the officer aggressively told her to get up out of her chair and escorted her out of the room. The judge looked to me, my aunt, my father, and his lawyer with one sweeping glance and then spoke. "I am sorry that you have had to deal with this for so long, young man. There's nothing more that you or anyone else needs to say. You deserve to live a normal life as a normal kid, and it's obvious to me now that your parents are unfit to produce that kind of environment. You will go back to Texas with your aunt, and we will regularly have our social workers in touch to check in on how you are doing. Make the most of this second chance. Good luck, young man." Adjourned. Though the bang of his gavel was the only noise that permeated the room, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. My father and his lawyer were escorted out of the room, and the tears I had held back all this time came gushing out like a tidal wave. It's been 7 years since that day, and I am happy to say that I've managed to grow up and become a well-adjusted adult. I have a great career, great friends, and an amazing girlfriend. I've been in therapy ever since we got back to Texas, and I no longer have trouble sleeping or terrible bouts of anxiety and depression as I used to. Life is good. TL. Drive. Mother is a narcissist with dissociative personality disorder addicted to opiates. Father kind of just went with the flow and didn't really do much. Aunt came down to take me to Texas, saw how shit everything was and asked me if I wanted to live with them. After some time I said yes, went to court against my parents under the pretense of emancipation, and got to stare them down and lay out all the trauma, pain, and fear they've caused me. My mother was escorted out of the room when she tried to cut over me, and the judge sided with us and I was emancipated. Now I'm doing really well.